Hello, YouTube. Um, so we've covered the correspondence theory of truth as the thesis, and now this is the antithesis, right? So the correspondence theory of truth, as I mentioned, is transcendent, right? It implies a reality out there that transcends our minds that we try to get at, right? Now the antithesis reverses this, and it's essentially the solipsist position. What some people call the solipsist position, I might uh, prefer to call the skeptic position, um, in line with the Greek name, right? But we'll go with solipsist because it's a slightly more common term. Now the idea here is that instead of truth being transcendent, we make it immanent, right? So instead of this reality out there that we strive towards, um, it's that I am positing reality. I am positing this thing called reality, and all that really exists is me, right? Now, and I mean there are different levels of strength of solipsism, and there are plenty of different, you know, philosophers of solipsism, solipsist philosophers and philosophies, and obviously this video is going to be a little bit reductive, as was the correspondence video. Um, but um, what I can say, and please look them all up. What I can say about solipsism, though, is that it does get around the limitations of the correspondence theory of truth, right? In that, solipsism can be self-bootstrapping. It can get itself off the ground. If I deny in a strong way the existence, the ontological existence of reality out there, um, then 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 there's no reason that I can't start from the I, and build my way up and extrapolate out everything. Um, Probably the most uh, thorough attempt to do this can be found in the philosophy of Fichte, who was somebody. He was the next after Kant. He develops um, he develops a thorough system of philosophy that just simply starts with the proposition ich equals ich, right? I equals I, um, and from that identity he tries to then posit I, you know, the I posits the not I, and then etc., etc., etc. And so from here he tries to get around. He tries to get at the ontology of the I and the mechanisms by which the I posits reality, and exactly how reality emerges from the I, etc. Right? And so you can do it. You can give a thoroughly consistent self-bootstrapping account of reality and therefore of truth, um, uh, through purely solipsistic means. So it does get around the problems, all of the problems of the correspondence theory of truth. Um, Typically, and it, you know, these kinds of statements are always sort of rough and ready statements, but typically the theory of truth most commonly associated with with sort of strong forms of solipsism would be the coherence theory of truth. The idea that that which is true is that which is coherent, that is to say, the I posits something, and if that something is coherent, then that thing is true. Since all of the world, for a strong solipsist, are things that the I is positing, in some way, it's kind of like a correspondence theory of truth. The world is something that I posit, and if some particular thing that I posit coheres with that, or corresponds with that, you could think of it this way, then that thing is true. Right. So, again, this really does get around the problem simply by shifting transcendence to immanence, which is sort of a theme in modern philosophy. So politics, for instance, at one point it was the divine right of kings that justified rulership. So this is a transcendent politics that turns into an immanent politics in Rousseau, the idea being that no, it's not some transcendent being that guarantees the legitimacy of power. It is the immanent will of a people, and you get these, you get democracy sort of out of this line of thinking. So this shift from the transcendent to the immanent is very powerful, and that's why I'm posing it as an antithesis. But there's obviously a problem, right? And even though it gets around the limitations of the correspondence theory of truth, and even though it can be perfectly consistent and self-bootstrapping, there's something that is radically impractical about it. In that, I wake up and I'm hungry, so I make breakfast, right? And I go to work and I have to interact with other people. That's the big thing, is the fact that there are other people, right? So it's because there are other people, if those other people are something that the I is just positing, then there are sort of moral problems, right? What is my obligation to another person if I am positing that person's existence rather than they are existing in and of themselves? And it just feels kind of implausible. I don't think in some way we're really wired to think that way. It doesn't do it. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't do it for us. We want something better than that. Which may or may not be I don't think that it's possible to really give a reductio, like a formal critique of the solipsist position, but it's not really good enough, G.K. Chesterton, who's a Christian apologist, a Christian apologist, in his book Orthodoxy, starts out by talking about the madman, and he talks about the madman as, the madman's view of the world, the insane person's view of the world, is thoroughly consistent. If you ask them a question, they will have an answer for you, right? They are out to get me, this kind of almost caricature of insanity that you could give. You could imagine somebody constantly giving an answer, and the whole thing being thoroughly consistent and thought out, right? And that explanation, those kinds of explanations, conspiracy theories, for instance, those do explain things, right? They do explain the world. In this way, and the reason I reference Chesterton is because he gives this beautiful line where he says, it's just as infinite as a circle, right? The problem isn't that it's not as infinite as a circle. The problem is that it draws a very small circle. See what I mean? It's not that the thing isn't consistent. It's not that the thing isn't self-bootstrapping, and it's not that the thing doesn't work. It's that the picture of reality that is generated from that is extremely limited and small and kind of uninteresting. But again, for the most that I'm aware of, the most thorough and internally consistent version of this line of thinking. I would point to Fichte, Fichte. Um, and actually, in Zizek's latest book, Less Than Nothing, he gives a really interesting reading of Fichte. So I would go to that. And yeah, so that is the Antitheses.